been talking about a week that Barack Obama and millions of Americans could have easily done without. A week that began with back-to-back explosions near the finish line of the Boston Marathon, and that's been punctuated by a poison-laced letter sent to Obama and a stinging gun control defeat for the president in Congress. And now the latest horrific headline as well, a massive blast at a fertilizer plant in West Texas. That's a town eerily close to the Waco site of an infamous mass suicide almost exactly 20 years ago to the day. Maybe the worst week for Obama's presidency. Now we're asking, can he recover? Does he still hold the political upper hand? How compromised is his agenda? With me here in the studio once again, Cecile Naves. Thanks for being here. You are with the think tank Difference. You're also a researcher and a political scientist, specializing on neoconservatives and the Tea Party. Also joining me, Laurie Dundon, a fellow with the Truman National Security Project, former State Department officer. Also here in the studio, Gerald Olivier, journalist, editor at Atlantico, author of a recent book about Mitt Romney, and from Washington, Josh Kraushaar, executive editor of the National Journal Hotline and writer of a weekly column called Against the Grain. Josh, I want to kick off with you, but first I just want our viewers to watch Barack Obama, very short time ago, speaking at that interfaith service we were talking about in the first half to the victims of the Boston bombings. Let's listen to the president.
The fact is, most of these senators could not offer any good reason why we wouldn't want to make it harder for criminals and those with severe mental illnesses to buy a gun. There were no coherent arguments as to why we wouldn't do this. It came down to politics. So all in all, this was a pretty shameful day for Washington. But this effort is not over. I want to make it clear to the American people, we can still bring about meaningful changes that reduce gun violence so long as the American people don't give up on it.
Well, clearly that was Barack Obama in the Rose Garden, not at the Boston Interfaith Service. I apologize for that. But Josh, the question's still going to apply to you. This was obviously a major political setback. The bill can still be revived. Beyond just the gun control defeat, how much of this is a blow to his overall domestic agenda, whether we're talking guns, immigration, budget, whatever?
Well, it's potentially a very big blow because right on the heels of the gun control legislation is the bipartisan pitch for immigration reform. And when you're out there and you're criticizing members of your own party and the opposition, votes you'll need to get the votes necessary to pass immigration reform through the Senate, you're already poisoning the well in what was already a very contentious relationship between the White House and congressional leadership, certainly on the Republican side. So the political dynamic on immigration is more favorable for the White House, but at the same time, the White House wants to get a significant majority of votes in favor of some bipartisan immigration reform compromise. And if you're talking to these swing state Republicans who were a little bit wary about jumping on the immigration bandwagon, the whole rhetoric that the president talked about yesterday, the harsh rhetoric criticizing those who didn't support him on gun control, could backfire, could poison the well. So they're the legislative agenda is very interconnected, and immigration reform still is in decent shape, but it can't encourage the White House, watching what happened with gun control, be awfully optimistic when it comes to immigration reform.
And Gerald Olivier, I saw you reacting to that. How much does this weaken Barack Obama? Do you agree that it does sort of dilute his political capital in a sense as he tries to go on immigration?
I quite agree with everything Josh said. And you were asking if it's the worst week of Obama's presidency. One thing is sure is that it's awfully early in a second term to become a lame duck president. And that's what everybody's talking about already. The thing is, with the gun debate, we're talking about it just a little bit before the break. It was not on Barack Obama's agenda, but he picked up that issue right after the Newtown tragedy. It made it his, and he involved himself very deeply, very emotionally, but very not smartly in terms of political, in political terms, and he's paying for it. And the problem with Barack Obama is that he is moving one issue at a time as if there was no issue after that one. It all started with the fiscal cliff. I mean, there were difficulties
Well,
between
health, I
Democrats and
suppose.
Republicans before. But the way he handled the fiscal cliff was using a political capital that he might need later. And it's exactly what he's doing right now. He's using a political capital that he might need for other
items.
bills. Absolutely.
We're saying doesn't have that much time left before he might be considered a lame duck. Marie Cecile, do you think this will embolden the very right wing of the United States, the real conservatives, even the Tea Party, who might not have been as vocal recently? Is this going to make them feel slightly triumphant?
Well, the neoconservatives seem to interest themselves only on foreign policy. They don't seem to be interested in domestic issues, well, for the moment. What is interesting now, interesting from a researcher point of view, is that at the local level, conservatives do everything they can to oppose federal government. And notably, for example, in voting laws that are against the Constitution, for example, in North Dakota, the anti-abortion law and so on, and they perfectly know it's against the Constitution, it's against the American spirit, but they do it to challenge Washington and to challenge Obama. And
just for the sake of challenging him,
exactly.
just to have a fight.
Exactly, and it will cost them a lot to defend such laws in courts, because they are going to face that. But what I would like to say is something a bit new, is that concerning the vote in the Senate yesterday, citizens seem to mobilize a lot against this decision. Just after the article written by Gabriel Gifford, there were pages on Facebook and on social networks to denounce the decision. And it's interesting to see that people who are not from right wing use the same methods. I mean,
a lot of mobility. So it's not just the right. There's a very vocal contingent on the left as well. Before we go on, I want to just show our viewers one instance of what Obama and those who support stricter gun control were up against on the eve of this vote. There was an advertisement put out by the National Rifle Association. Now, Obama afterwards says it was all a bunch of lies and misleading information, but let's watch a clip, an excerpt from that advertisement.
The Obama administration believes a gun ban will not work without mandatory gun confiscation. And universal background checks will not work without requiring national gun registration. Still think President Obama's proposals sound reasonable? Call Congress and tell them to reject President Obama's gun control agenda.
Laurie, Dundon, a lot of people, I would imagine, listened to that message, and I imagine they called their Congress and objected to the legislation.
Well, and as we were talking about the breakdown in Senate and congressional politics and the left and right, the lobbying value is, they've got a lot of money going in and then activate your public base. Obama has tried to activate the public base and use that actually as a challenge to the people. It's an interesting theme he's been picking up on ever since his inauguration speech, where he started to say, okay, I need you behind me in order to make some of these changes that were deadlocked in the first term. He transferred over his political machinery to a new Organizing Action for America, and is trying to use that base. And that's the same base I think he turned to yesterday, 2 days ago, with his anger and frustration to say, I'm stuck. You have to get more passionate about this issue, because although the numbers, percentage support for background checks on gun control, the initiative that was under discussion in the Senate this week, the support was 80 to 90% coming in, there was still a depth. We were missing the depth. We had breadth, but not as much depth, not as much passion as those fighting against the bill.
Josh, I want to put the question to you then. Does Organizing for America, the group that Obama's really set up to sort of help push his agenda, do they have the ammunition to take on what I guess Gabriel Giffords would call the special interests and the gun lobby and the NRA?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this event and the situation and all the money that was spent, all the lobbying that was done on the pro-gun control side as well, I mean, what made this so unique is you had the confluence of emotion and just the sheer tragedy of what's happened over the last several months in terms of gun crimes. And you also had both Obama's new lobbying organization, Organizing for Action, and Michael Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City, also poured $12 million into the lobbying effort to counter the NRA. They actually may have spent more money on this lobbying effort than the NRA did. And what's striking is they still couldn't get the 60 votes. They still couldn't even get those Democrats, those 4 Democrats off the fence and swing state Republicans from districts, or rather from states that Obama won in the last presidential election. So it really does make you wonder if that can't happen, if you can't get any diluted gun control legislation passed during this confluence of events when you have the counter to the NRA that emerged in a big way. I don't know if it ever, at least in the short term, can't be done.
So, Gerald, Olivier, are we seeing a situation then essentially in the U.S.? We've always talked about red and blue states. Some people object to that qualification. Are we seeing such a polarized situation now more than ever before that political dialogue, I guess a little bit what's happening in France at the moment to a certain extent, they're stuck? No matter how well-intentioned you are, no matter how hard you push, there's a point at which you just can't go further.
Well, what you feel, I think, is that elected officials are responsible only to their electors, to their constituents. Usually, when the president puts the weight of his office behind a bill, people rally to him to a certain extent. Here, it did not work at all, and that's fairly unusual. So what it tells me is that the Republicans have a real problem with getting into the White House, but they don't have a problem with holding the House and maybe even getting the Senate next time, and that's what they're after. And to go after that and get it, they feel that they have to be responsible to what their constituents want. And so you answer to the local level, and you don't answer to the national level. All politics is local. You know, it's not new, and Tip O'Neill used to say that in the U.S. It's always been like this.
While we're on it, I mentioned France, and as long as we're sitting here in Paris, I mean, do you see similarities right now with what's happening on the French political scene, with perhaps not to the same extreme point at this, but the polarization and the inability of people to speak to each other on some big issues?
The situation is rather different because you have a real parliamentary system where people will vote the party line, whereas the U.S. you have a Congress where people are supposed to cross over and work on bipartisanship.
But they're not.
No, they're not. They're not anymore. It's true. It's true. Fortunately for the United States, the situation is much better there than it is here, at least economically. And what we're seeing in France is growing discredit regarding the whole political class for reasons that are not political and which make things worse. Americans, at least the elected officials, have decided to go head-to-head in terms that I would almost describe as ideological, which is an option. It doesn't work very well, but it creates a situation that we have. In France, with the Jérôme Cahuzac business of money laundering and having bank accounts in foreign countries.
This was the former budget minister who was supposed to fight tax evasion and lied himself about a Swiss bank account.
It brings discredit to the whole class of people, regardless of the debate, and I think that's much worse.
Laurie, how do you break the deadlock? Is it possible to break this deadlock? Can Barack Obama... Is he stuck, I suppose, is the question I'm wondering.
Well, I don't think the political climate is going to change much anytime sooner, the deadlock on crossing the aisle. But I think it was interesting, a discussion we started to have earlier about immigration reform, if that's the next item on the docket, because we have seen the risk, and I think Josh made a really good point about potentially souring the well as you move into this debate, particularly as emotions have gotten tense in the last couple of days. But the politics of the immigration reform issue are much more self-interested. The Republican Party has much more, and many of the voters who have been disruptive on issues like gun control have much more of a self-interest in seeing which way the demographic trends are moving and preparing themselves to be in a better position for the upcoming elections.
Those demographic trends, we know it's the Hispanic electorate, as we saw in the last election, is going to become a much more dominant voice in American politics. The Republicans are fearful, not fearful, but they have to acknowledge that.
They missed the demographic issue during the campaign, and that's one of the reasons why they lost the election. And they are not very much aware of the fact that Latinos are very, very, very numerous, and I think we can be surprised about debates and the votes about the immigration law, and the attitude of Republicans might be for us from France surprising.
In other words, when you say might be surprising, you're saying they might be more inclined to cooperate
Yes,
with
absolutely.
cross the aisle, as they
Yes.
say in American politics, cooperate with the Democrats on that. Josh, since you're the one in Washington, we're all sitting here in Paris. What do you think of that? Is immigration now, I'm not going to call it a slam dunk using an American basketball metaphor, but is it still a pretty much in the bag for Obama?
I don't know if it's in the bag, but I do think it has the most promise given what we've been talking about, that there's some political incentive for Republicans who have done so poorly in the last two presidential elections with Hispanics that they reach out and try to at least take a big negative away by being by the perception of them being a party that's hostile to the interests of Hispanic immigrants. But you know, a lot of these votes, you talk to a lot of Democratic and Republican senators from conservative states or ones that want to compromise, and there are three big controversial issues that have come in the docket over the past few weeks: the issue of gay marriage, the issue of immigration, and the issue of gun control. A lot of these Democratic senators in particular will tell you they can, if they're from a conservative state, they'll tell you they can break with their constituencies on one of those three issues, maybe even two. They just can't do it with all three of them. So gun control was the one issue where you saw a lot. You couldn't get the hat trick. So gun control was the one they were least likely to break with their constituents on and support Obama. Immigration is the one they're most likely to, and certainly is the one that Republicans who are from swing states or even some Republican states that want to curry favor with Hispanic voters, that's where you're more likely to see them break with a conservative base.
In the very little time, last question that we have left, Laurie, I'm going to leave you with the last word here. Barack Obama said today in Boston, he said, America may be momentarily hurt, but it will pick itself up and finish the race. Do you share his optimism right now for the little time we were saying he has left before he's a lame duck in this second term?
Well, he still has 3.5 years of his term. Let's hope he's not a lame duck quite yet. I think it's a leader's job to say exactly what he said today, to inspire people to keep going forward. The harder the hits this week, the more the challenge he has to try and inspire people to keep the ball rolling.
Laurie Dundon, we're going to have to leave it there. We've been talking about whether or not this is perhaps Obama's worst week, and who knows, maybe we'll have another debate in a few weeks, that a worser week, and then the worsest week. Who knows? But I'd like to thank our guests here, Cecile Naves, thank you very much, researcher, political scientist, think tank Difference, Laurie Dundon, Truman National Security Project, former State Department officer, also Gerald Olivier, journalist, editor at Atlantico, author of a book on Mitt Romney. Thanks.
Correct.
And in Washington, Josh Kraushaar, thank you very much, writer for the National Journal, columnist against the grain. It's been a pleasure having you all. I hope we don't have to keep coming back for worse and worse weeks with Barack Obama. Thanks to all of you for watching the debate here on France 24.